Before we get started, I just wanted to get a quick idea of who in this session is part of an in-house or product team, and then who is working at an agency. So really quick, you can unmute or you can just pop a quick hello in the chat, but let me know if you're part of an agency or an in-house team. Nice, I'm seeing a lot of agency. Okay. Looks like it's pretty even. Let's try my video too. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. That just helps us get a good idea of who we're talking to today. It looks like we have a pretty solid mix of agency and in-house folks, as well as some freelancers. So we're going to go ahead and get started. First things first, without a guiding light, Drupal can get pretty messy. And I just have a couple examples of that. So this is one example of a client who came to us for help with a migration project, and they actually had 73 content types, which I had never seen a Drupal site have this many content types before. So it was really difficult to try to figure out. We had to map some pages from a site that that company had acquired to one of these content types, and just trying to figure out which one we were supposed to use was extremely difficult. Another example, this client, instead of using paragraphs and the fields within the paragraphs to make content entry easy, this client used the same paragraph for every single component on their site. And then they just changed out the source code in the description WYSIWYG. So it's pretty crazy. I'm a designer myself, and we'll get to introductions here in a quick minute, but thankfully I knew enough like HTML and CSS to get by trying to like figure out what I was doing here. Eric.
Eric, you're muted.
Thank you so much. So anyway, this just isn't happening to Drupal, small companies, and it's not just specific to Drupal. We're definitely focusing on Drupal, obviously, but this happens to big companies, small companies, all kinds of companies, and it can be argued that the bigger the company, the worse this is, because you get into kind of massive amounts of technical debt, and as you start getting thousands and thousands of pages added in this manner, it gets incredibly unwieldy. So an actual good example that we have for this is HubSpot. Although it's not a Drupal site, they did conduct a component audit in 2018 as they were trying to build out their own design system. And they found out they were using tons and tons of different inconsistent design components throughout their site. And this included like 100+ shades of gray, 40+ text styles, 16 different modal styles, 6 different button types, 5 different ways to filter a table, and like thousands and thousands and thousands of lines of custom CSS. And it just happens, you know, if you don't have something to guide you, as stuff just gets hacked in, quick and dirty needs rise up and stuff like that, it just gets pretty unmaintainable. So with that.
Cool, yeah, so some quick introductions. My name is Jessica Ito, and I'm a UX designer at Elevated Third.
Cool. Yeah, and I'm Eric Schmidt. I'm a Drupal developer at Elevated Third, focusing more on front-end stuff and also on our open source initiatives.
And like we mentioned, we work at a digital agency called Elevated Third. We're a Drupal-only agency right now, and we focus primarily on full website redesigns of enterprise B2B companies.
Cool. Yeah, just a little bit more about us and some of our bona fides. We've been around for about 15 years, originally based in Denver, Colorado, but we've since opened offices in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Seattle, Washington within the last couple of years. We're also actually we have 4 of the 150 worldwide grandmasters, which is pretty cool, as you know. We're also a certified Acquia partner specializing in B2B. And then in addition to that, we're strong supporters of the Drupal community, be that through contributed modules or different sponsorships for different conferences, or we are pretty heavily involved in the Drupal Camp Colorado conference here in Denver every year. Quite a few of us are huge contributors to that as well. And this is all just so that you know you can trust what we're saying is valid.
Cool. So getting into design systems. Design systems are all the rage right now, but the word means different things to different people, as we've learned sort of figuring it out for ourselves, as well as like working with other partners who have been doing things a little bit differently. So now we're going to spend some time telling you a little bit about what a design system means to us so that we can all be on the same page moving forward. But first, before we talk about design systems, need to touch on atomic design. And I'm sure you guys are all pretty fairly familiar with the principles of atomic design. So throughout the UX and visual process, we use atomic design principles in order to create a more scalable site that can accommodate many different use cases. And more specifically, I guess we used to rely really heavily on paragraphs. Now, of course, as we move more into focusing on layout builder, we're relying more so on like blocks and sections, but similar ideas. And then, of course, our content types to build out our design system.
Cool. Yeah, and from a dev perspective, our biggest reason for building atomically is our end goal is that pretty much we should always be able to add any component to any page as needed, and it should just work without much dev effort. And what that means is that you should be thinking in a componentized mindset with your selectors and your templating, so that component is not tied to a page on which it originally was built. Occasionally there are use cases for that, and there's ways around that to still keep the componentization intact when you need to be reliant on your parent. But that's really the end goal, and that's kind of what started this years ago for us. Was our technical director noticed some of the sites we were building out did not have this, and he said it is just like unacceptable that we were spending all this time refactoring components when we could be building them from the outset to be usable anywhere on the site. A client comes back and is like, I love this page and I'd love to use this component here, and it's all of a sudden, well, that's going to take a couple hours worth of work to refactor it, when you could be thinking about this at the beginning. So it's super quick and easy to just add one-off stuff as the need arises, and it still happens, but it's always better in the long run to just take a little bit more time at the beginning, take a step back, think of things out before you start building, and just strive for reusability. Just before you even start any coding, just really jot stuff down or map stuff out and just really think ahead, and it'll save you tons of time in the long run and tons of technical debt.
So in a minute, we're going to talk about some of the different types of design systems, but they should all serve a similar function. And for us, that's serving as a source of truth for designers, developers, and our clients. And we consider design systems to be a living document that should stay up to date with the site, so that it's usable as a reference right now and forever, I guess, as you move forward through a project, or as your designs adapt throughout the product's life cycle. So at Elevated Third, we're really big fans of design systems, and I'm going to tell you why. So they give the entire team, including the client, a common language that reduces confusion and misconceptions. And I think a good example of that for us is the term landing page. So if you say landing page and you're talking to somebody who's in marketing, they might think of a landing page being, a page that you land on that has a form and it's really like conversion focused. Whereas for us, we name a lot of our super unstructured content types a landing page. So those are the pages that that our clients are using as they're building out a lot of like the unstructured component layout builder type stuff. They also help us develop more scalable websites, and they force designers and developers to remain consistent. For us, it's the rule book, and we don't make exceptions to the rules unless there's a good reason to. They serve as a useful internal tool that provides a pretty smooth transition from design to development. So if the lead designer and developer are annotating everything together, when it's time to bring on some support devs later on in a project who don't have as much context, then they can reference the design system and they're able to know what they need to know to move forward with tasks. And then lastly, they also serve as a useful tool for our clients to refer back to when they're doing content entry. Cool, so now we're going to talk about some of the different types of design systems that we've seen. And the first one is really just not having a design system at all. I'm thinking about this almost like the design system maturity model. So step one is no design system. This means you don't have any type of documentation, and this is what really leads to that like inconsistent implementation if we think about like that HubSpot example. The second type we refer to is a tactical design system. So now you actually are starting to have some documentation. It's probably kept in more so of like a static document. So it's a huge chore to keep it updated. But at this point, you're including lists of components. Maybe you have some like digital style rules in there. And there are probably only a few teams that know that it even exists. Most likely just the dev team and the design team. The third type, strategic, this is when it starts to get a little bit more integrated into an organization's process. So this design system is dynamic and it's consistently updated and well maintained. At this point, you might start to include some code snippets in there with the documentation, and it becomes more well known within an organization. And then lastly, we have the integrated design system, which is when the design system is built, like fully built into an organization's process. It's still dynamic, but it's taken up a notch with releases and version control. And then instead of code snippets, maybe now you're using a pattern library in conjunction with that documentation. And like I said, it's just built into an organization's process. So that company-wide, you see a lot more of that like company-wide adoption, a lot more teams being familiar, at least familiar with the concept of what a design system is to inform some decision-making. So because we are an agency, we find that our sweet spot with like thinking about the cost to benefit ratio for creating a design system is right in between tactical and strategic. We typically are working on dozens of projects as an agency at a time, and all of them have fixed timelines and budgets. So we don't have the time to invest more than we need to in a design system. For us, the approach we take is a good enough approach. And that ends up being like what makes most sense for us. It still helps us do all of the things that I talked about before, like having that common language and smooth transition from design to dev. And then it ends up being a great tool for our clients to use as well. But for in-house or product teams, this investment becomes a lot more worth it in the long run. And we've worked with some partners who've done this type of setup in the past, and it actually it amazes me the level of detail that they go in with some of this stuff, and the time that they spend investing into creating this like super built out design system. With symbols and sketch and pattern libraries and things like that. We just typically, as an agency, don't have the time to do that, unfortunately. So we don't have a whole lot of firsthand experience with this type of design system. So we're going to be spending most of the rest of the talk really focusing on like how we get to that sweet spot and showing you a couple of examples of what that means. So really quick, I'm going to share 2 examples of design systems we've done in the past. So this first one, this is definitely more of like your static design system. So we actually laid this out in Sketch. I don't know, I just got a notification my internet connection is unstable. Let me know if you guys have any problems hearing me or anything. But this is when we were using a lot more paragraphs. So we sort of like, along with the atomic design idea, we break out our components. We typically did in like a simple components, so the smaller pieces, and then we had our compound components. So when you start to combine more of those simple components, that's what these look like. But you'll see typically for each component, we'll have a description. We'll list out the fields for each one and let everybody know what's required. And then we'll have like a things to know section. So in this example, this testimonial, you're adding simple testimonials. So each one of these tabs is a simple testimonial. And in this example, up to 5 simple testimonials could be added. So we like to note those things out so everybody on the team is aware, and it's especially helpful when our clients are planning for content entry. Another example. So this is a more recent one that we've put together using InVision's Design System Manager, and I'll show you guys in a little bit how we actually use Sketch to put this together. But this starts to get a little bit more dynamic here. You can actually like interact with the menu over here. You can see all of your components in one list, or you can just narrow it down to like the molecule level. And then when you click into one of these, that's a bad example. When you click into one of these, we can actually like include this documentation right here. I'm a big fan of doing it this way because it's just a lot quicker. You don't have to worry about little like nuances with laying things out. You're just uploading screenshots, and you can add your copy right in here. InVision's Design System Manager, you can start to add some of the code snippets in here as well, but we haven't fully explored that route yet. It is something that we're looking into. Cool, so now we're going to spend some time talking a little bit about how this works as part of our process and how we get to the end result of some of those design systems.
Awesome. Yeah, and just to chime in from a dev perspective on the things that Jess just touched on, this really succeeds when both design and dev are fully invested and fully collaborative in this process. I know it's easier said than done, project to project. We're lucky enough to have a majority of our projects where the design and the dev falls in-house, and that does foster a lot more close communication. And it's definitely like the ideal situation. However, it can still happen without having both teams on the internal side. It needs to be a feedback loop. You can't, things get really bogged down when you have a design team sending you stuff, not thinking through Drupal componentization or thinking through design systems. And then same with dev, if design is thinking through that and dev's not thinking in a componentized mindset, it just sets things up to be kind of awkward. So at the outset, it's great to just get buy-in from everybody at the beginning to be kind of closely in touch and iterative throughout the whole process when it comes to breaking stuff down. Design is great at componentizing stuff how they see fit. However, Drupal obviously has limitations that they may or may not know. So that's where dev comes in and can really help out with that as well.
Yeah, so as a designer, it's part of my job, like Eric mentioned, to start thinking about the design system and components and atomic design as I am putting the wireframes together. So I'm constantly thinking about what could be a component, how can I consolidate things that are similar, and then like what the functionality of something might be. And personally, I feel like I've gotten so used to thinking this way that sometimes I have to, like, just as a designer, you know, of course we have goals of being creative, so sometimes I have to force myself to stop thinking about this so much, so that it doesn't, like, limit me and keep me in the box. But I think it's a good thing and a bad thing. It can be a limiting mindset as a creative, but it is really helpful as you move into the dev process. And then once I have done my part with the wireframes and they're completed, the lead designer, so this screenshot here is an example of a project that Eric and I were lead designer and lead dev on. So this example, we came together, and this is where I was able to tell him all of the things that I was thinking about as I was putting the wires together, and we can start annotating them. But we'll have, like, discussions on them, and this is really the time when we start making a lot of those decisions. So I can let him know, like, hey, I was thinking about this component in this way. This is how we could reuse it across the site. Here are some fields and, like, some functionality. So in this example, you could select, like, up to 6 references. But the client would have to select it manually. And then we also start thinking about naming conventions as well at this time. So yeah, Eric, do you have anything to add on this?
Yeah, actually, if you want to bump to the next slide, I think I can kind of tie it together with the, actually, go ahead one more. I think these got out of order.
Okay.
At the build spec slide. There we go. Yeah, so calling this back to the last slide that Jess showed with the annotations, essentially we go back and forth quite a bit on there, and then that is what eventually results in what we call a build spec, which is just essentially a kind of fully fleshed out spreadsheet where we can actually architect all of our ideas before actually going and actually trying to do development. It again codifies the collaboration between design and dev, but it also allows for quick iterations of architecture. Instead of going into Drupal and, like, building a content type out and seeing if it works, it just lets us, you know, we essentially have a tab for nodes, tab for components, tab for fields, and just kind of list these things out and can quickly just iterate and see, does this feel right? You know, how does this look? And just, for one, do it quickly, but also it just allows for passing things off as well too. That way, if I have an idea in terms of architecture, but don't necessarily have the time to build it out, I can document it here and shoot it over to somebody else, and they know exactly what I was thinking of, and can get that built out. And just, again, and just makes it much, much easier. You know, it's kind of akin to doing wireframes as a dev. Instead of doing something fully high fidelity, I'm just kind of doing roughs to kind of get a feel for how it would work. And then this eventually turns into just the boilerplate for a full design system. When she was screen sharing the design system manager in InVision, that essentially is me giving them the build spec, and then they're going through the build spec that once it's finalized and making it pretty and putting it into the design system manager, putting the fields in, the requirements, and then adding the screenshots. So it's this, again, constant feedback loop that we've created that just really ends up coming up with something really awesome that we're able to refer to now and in the future. And even if you want to go back to that last one, since it got out of order here.
Sure.
Yeah, and then finally, just kind of one last point on this as we get into the collaborative process between Jess and I is, it's very easy to end up with components that just get overly complex. And by that, I mean components that end up having tons and tons of options. For instance, you have a banner that could have a background image, or it couldn't have a background image. It could have a bunch of teasers, or it could have teasers of totally different content types. And all of a sudden you end up with all of these different pieces into a single component. And I've just learned the lesson many times the hard way, to just break these out as they start getting more complex and more options are needed. It's just much better to break these things out into their own components. They get unwieldy both for devs and for content admins. As a dev, it gets unwieldy because all of a sudden I'm dealing with all kinds of if statements and templating conditionals and stuff like that, because I'm trying to account for different ways that this should look. And then two, it gets really unwieldy for content admins because now all of a sudden they're adding a component to a page that has 100 different options on it, and they have no idea how to get to the component that they're trying to make. You know, when they're looking at the design, it's like really hard to figure out, okay, well, what do I actually need to add to this page? So that's where it just gets kind of tough. it's a case-by-case basis. There's no hard and fast rules for when you should break it out, but honestly, it's more, for me anyway, it's kind of a gut feeling. If something's starting to feel unwieldy as I'm building it out, it probably is, and it's kind of time to think about breaking it out. It may seem more time consuming to build out a whole other content type or paragraph or component block, whatever, but in the long run, it tends to be much quicker, especially if you're kind of iterating via that build spec as well, instead of just building it out right away. Cool. That's all I got there. Jess, if you want to pop back through there. Sorry about that.
Yeah. No worries. Okay, cool. So we saw the front end of the design system and what that looks like earlier. Now I'm gonna hop over to Sketch really fast and show you guys how we use Sketch and the Craft plugin to make everything work together. So I'm just gonna jump over here. So this is, these are my design layouts in Sketch here. And we've got the Craft plugin plugged into Sketch, and if you're not familiar with that is, I think I'll add a link to our presentation page with the slides, and I can add a link to Craft as well. But it's really great. It's what puts this toolbar over here on the side. So you can actually, the nice thing about it is you can use it to upload an artboard to Sketch, and if you upload an artboard to Sketch like this versus just exporting it as a flattened file, then this is what allows developers to use the inspect mode on InVision, which is really nice. But for the design system, the hotkey to open that up when you have Craft installed, if you're on a Mac, it's Command L. So I can open that up here like this, and you'll see it pulls in colors, your text styles. So if you've determined what those text styles are and you have them in Sketch, you can add them here, and it will just upload everything that a developer may need to know. If you have any layer styles like a drop shadow, you can add icons in here. I don't have icons in this particular design system, but it's really nice because you can upload them directly from Sketch, and then anybody can reference the design system and just download them as an SVG from there, which is pretty cool. But for components, you can add however many folders you need to. So however your organization organizes your components, you can reflect that in the folder system here. But let me just show you really quick how we can add a component. Let me zoom in. Okay, so we'll add this component to the design system here. Right now, I just have this, my layers are a huge mess, but I just have this named group 15. So if I go over here to the design system manager, I can just click this plus here. You'll see it's adding it. It's adding it outside of my folders because I didn't have a folder selected. But if I click on that component, I can rename it. So we'll say this is like just related content component. And then you can really just add whatever type of description you want to in here. So like I mentioned earlier, we typically just add like a description. If we have a specific use case for this component in mind, we'll note that here. We'll note the fields and then like any functionality. So in this particular example, this component, we would let our clients know that it's pulling in dynamically pulling in related content based on the tags that are applied to that parent page. And it can pull in a couple of different content types. It can pull in like articles, webinars, and resources. So that's pretty cool. But they can also manually override any of these as well. So it may automatically populate the teaser for this featured one, but they would be able to override really any of these if needed. So then I'm going to jump back over to what it looks like on the site. And it'll let me know here if I have this open in the browser. that I'm viewing an out-of-date version of the library because I refreshed it, or I changed it in Sketch. So I can just refresh it. And then if I go back out to the components, we'll see that this component has been added here. And anybody, as long as you have like the sharing permission set up right, anybody who has this link can come here and read whatever documentation we have about this component. So that's it for the demo for right now from my side. But if you guys have any additional questions about Sketch or InVision or the Craft plugin, I'm happy to meet you guys on the Slack channel after this talk and we can get those questions answered. And then Eric, I'm gonna stop sharing so that you can start sharing.
Yeah, that sounds good. Alrighty. Everybody see this okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Alrighty. Let's go full screen here. Maybe. Yeah, good enough. Cool. Yeah, so now I'm going to start kind of running through some of the development tools that we use to implement the design system that Jessica or our other designers come up with after this whole discovery phase and the back and forth that we have. We have quite a few tools that we use. Some of them are like contributed modules. Some of them are like internal tools. Some of them are, you know, theme level tools, stuff like that. So I'm just going to kind of run through the highlights. Every project's a little bit different. Might have different needs here and there or different restrictions on what we can and can't use. But these are the kind of the highlights that pretty much find their way onto each and every project that we're using. So I'm going to kind of just run through these here. First one is paragraphs, which is pretty much the quintessential componentization for Drupal. Most people probably have experience with this. If you don't, it's just a great way to essentially allow, for one, multi-value fields, but also it lets you create custom inline entities essentially that can be added to each and every page, allowing one field to have multiple different types of components added. For instance, you can have a header field that allows you to add multiple header component types, you know, basic or a more full featured header banner, stuff like that. This has been used by us for years and years now. We've gotten really good at using it, and we've really honed it in, especially when I get into some of the contrib modules that we use with this as well, that just make it a really awesome asset to our tool belt. It's slowly but surely getting a little bit more replaced by Layout Builder now that that's been stable in core, and I'll go into that in a little bit here as well. Layout Builder is obviously not as fully, I don't know, what the bells and whistles are not all the way there yet, in my opinion. So we still are using paragraphs here and there for different use cases, mainly for pages that are not using Layout Builder, because Layout Builder is kind of an all or nothing thing. When you have it on a page, it's pretty much only going to be using Layout Builder. We have certain pages that are more structured, like a blog page might need a component added to the very bottom, and you know, like a CTA or something. So we'll kind of leverage a paragraph field there. Regardless, it still gives us great flexibility for componentization, and it lets you really target your components, classes, and styling and templating all kind of in a very compartmentalized fashion. Above and beyond paragraphs, we leverage another module called Paragraphs Browser. This is actually a module that we built in-house, and it is on Drupal.org, so it's open source and definitely usable by anybody that would like to use it. I think it was released 2 or 3 years ago. I think it's technically not a full release yet, but it's definitely stable enough that we've been using it on tons and tons of production sites without issue. The beauty of this module is it gives you, rather than just having like small buttons with like a title when you're adding your paragraph, it lets you actually have a whole modal window open up, and you can kind of see it in the screenshot here, and I'll actually show you a live example as well. But it just gives you the ability to show descriptions, and screenshots is really the clincher here of each component. And this is how we kind of translate that design system that Jess was just showing to admins. Like, they can then look at that design system, see the component they're looking for, pop over to Drupal, open Paragraphs Browser, and it's like a one-to-one. They're like, oh, here's that in my design system. Here it is in Drupal. Instant. I know exactly what I'm trying to add. just makes it super, super easy. And I think it's a great module to use if you're using paragraphs. So I have a quick example I can show here. This is a UBT. It's a bank website that we recently rolled out. So I've got different fields here. I've got like a header up here using a paragraph. I'll show you main content here. Essentially, just instead of having a bunch of different buttons or a drop down or whatever, it just gives you one button for adding a component. And if I click it, it's going to pop up a modal window here. You've got different filters for your different types. It's a little blank here because there's only one of each of these. But if I scroll down, you'll start seeing that there's quite a few, you know, and the word billboard might not mean something to somebody necessarily, but when they see an image of it, it's like, oh, that's simple. I know exactly what that is, or a grid or a product comparison. Just makes it super easy to add this stuff in. And if I click add, it just plops the paragraph right in there. Loading a little slow for some reason, but yeah, super, super powerful module. I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't. Configuration's a little, it's not hard, it's just, it's a slight learning curve. Documentation's written really well, but again, if you have any questions on this, I'm happy to answer questions on that in Slack afterwards as well, because I think it's a great module to dig into. Cool. So those are our main two powerhouses that we've leveraged a lot in the past. But again, I mentioned we're starting to dabble quite a bit in Layout Builder. And this is going to essentially cutting edge componentization for Drupal, was just recently made stable, I believe in 8.8 release, or it might've been 8.7. Regardless, it's pretty fresh and new. It's kind of feels like the Wild West. There's a lot of really great opportunities with this, and we've seen some really powerful ideas come to light with this. It's just, it's got some needs still. Like there's definitely still some gotchas with it. So the beauty of this module now that we're kind of discovering as we've dived in, I think we're on like the 4th project that we've actually leveraged this kind of to varying degrees of success and varying degrees of complexity, starting very simple with very small sites and then moving into larger sites. And we're actually rebuilding our internal site right now and leveraging Layout Builder like fully. And this is where we're really finding the true power. And the true power to this is that it's kind of pushing dev, but it's also pushing design to be thinking more about fluid componentization, meaning with paragraphs, you can pretty much restrict what components can go where into like which paragraph field, whereas at least at this point anyway, for this, but at this point you can't really restrict what block goes into which section. So if you add a section to a page that's meant to be like a single column, sure, you can add your banner in there or whatever, but there's also the potential for users to be able to add something that you only envisioned being in like a 4th column. They could potentially drag that up and have it pop up into a big column. So we're having to think through, you know, what does that look like? You know, should we be accounting for this? And it's kind of a delicate balance of content entry training, like, hey, you maybe just shouldn't do this because it's just in no way would it look right. But also we can kind of inform design in that manner and be like, hey, you should kind of think about this because maybe this might give you a cool idea for a component on the site that you didn't even think of. Like you're thinking of this thing in like a 4th column. Imagine what it would look like in a full column, and all of a sudden you've created a new component almost with minimal effort because it just kind of works. So it's creating a really cool, even more back and forth communication where we're just design and dev are informing each other in whole new ways as we're kind of really digging into this and leveraging it to its full potential. Cool. So this does have some additional modules that we're leveraging quite a bit as well. There's 3 primary modules that we found that just make Layout Builder way easier to use and just kind of way nicer for admins as well. First one being Layout Builder Browser. I'm going to open the link to the contrib page here if that pops up. Cool. Yeah. So Layout Builder Browser, what it does is it makes the sidebar on your page a little bit easier to manage. And I'll show you an example of the site that we're currently building here. And I don't know if you're not familiar with Layout Builder, this might all be super wild, but it essentially cleans up this sidebar here and allows you to add icons or images to kind of illustrate what the components are. And it allows you to compartmentalize and categorize them, similar to how Paragraphs Browser lets us compartmentalize and categorize stuff. So that it just, by default, Layout Builder is giving you a huge jumbled mess of every single block imaginable, and it's just extremely unwieldy. And this just gives us the ability to really hone that in and just make it a lot more explicit for content admins. Let's see. And then the other one is Layout Builder Modal, which kind of gives us an additional layer of functionality that kind of resembles what Paragraph's browser does. This is where if you add a component, it's going to pop over a modal window to let you do like inline editing on that block. An example being, as I click text, it gives you a pop over here, and then you can just add the block directly instead of having to do it in the sidebar or do it in other kind of wonky ways. And then the let's see. Yeah, the one gotcha with this that we've encountered is that this is Layout Builder's leveraging your front end theme, not your admin theme. So we've ran into issues because all of our admin theme makes this look super pretty, but when we're on the front end, it's not necessarily styled to resemble what our admin theme looks like. So quick and dirty fix for that is that we've just begun including our admin kit or our admin theme on our front end Layout Builder pages, and that kind of definitely has helped to make this look a lot better. And then third and final module that we've been leveraging is called Layout Builder Restrictions. I'll open that contrib page here as well. And this one we use quite a bit in tandem with browser for restrictions. The main reason we use this one is just to restrict which layouts are available to be added to each page, meaning that we don't necessarily want every single page to be able to have every single layout added. And this gives us the ability to pick and choose which sections can be added to each page. Again, this, like I said, this is the Wild West. There are tons and tons of contrib opportunities for this to make to make the admin experience nicer, but also just some of the ability to restrict by block and stuff could be nice. But again, it's also opening us up to thinking more outside of the box. So just worth keeping in mind and worth digging into. And then on top of this, I'm going to kind of dive into our kind of two internal tools that we built out. They're both open source, but originally they were kind of internal tools that we used. The first of which being PARAGON, which is our Drupal 8 base build. It is on Drupal.org as an install profile or distribution. It's not stable yet, but we have been using it ourselves to build out projects. It essentially just pre-installs many common modules, shortens the setup time from Drupal from hours to just minutes, especially as it relates to configuring kind of more complex stuff like media libraries and entity browsers and stuff like that. That stuff all kind of comes out of the box, just pre-configured and ready to rock and roll. And it just takes a lot of the error and guesswork out of spinning up all these sites. And then in addition to PARAGON, within that, it comes with our base theme, which is called THEMEKIT. It's a foundation-based theme, and if you're not familiar with Foundation, it's a responsive framework that just gives you, for one, tons and tons of kind of out-of-the-box, ready-to-use, accessible components, such as like accordions and responsive navs, tabs, stuff like that. So we leverage those extensively so that we're not just reinventing the wheel every time we need like a tab component. We can just reference a Foundation component, throw it in, and know it's going to be accessible and easy to use. In addition to this, it gives us componentized theme structure out of the box. And I will show a demo here in a minute of how we are kind of structuring our themes currently. We're, with our new site build and with Layout Builder becoming a, one second, plug my computer in before I die. With Layout Builder kind of making us start to think outside of the box much more. We're kind of rethinking how we're componentizing our theme layer as well. And I'll kind of give you a run through of that. And then final point on THEMEKIT is it's built with Webpack for very, very optimized code. It just helps us really aid in that componentization. And I'll give you a demo of how we leverage Webpack as well. Webpack's a lot more extensively used in like front-end frameworks and stuff like that, when you're building out like Vue or React and stuff like that. And we're kind of taking bits and pieces of those front-end frameworks and kind of adapting it to our Drupal theme with actually quite a bit of success as well. So actually, I think with that, I will jump over to my IDE and give you guys an example. Cool. So just a basic install here. Themes, custom, and then I've got my theme kit. Admin kit is our admin theme, which is similar to THEMEKIT, but THEMEKIT's definitely the rock star here. Again, it's set up with Webpack, so you've got a Webpack config down here. I don't want to get too in the weeds with Webpack, but what Webpack allows us to do is create different entry points for all of our different components, and we can then therefore only include that CSS or that JavaScript in that particular component as like as its own individual library. So there's tons of entry points in here, and it's a little bit confusing, but what this is essentially doing is, let's go down to our like components. So I've got a component called page turn. This allows me to just specify, hey, this is my CSS or my SAS file for that. Go ahead and just compile that. And it's going to compile that into my dist folder with a file name called page turn here. I can then create a library for that in my, not my info, in my libraries file. If I search for page turn, you'll see I'm creating just a library just for that. And all it's doing is including this page-turn. That file might not be very huge, but you might have some where you're including tons of CSS, tons of JavaScript. So when you compartmentalize this and then take this over to your template, you can include that and only that on that component. So when that renders on the page, it'll take that CSS with it. If that component's not on the page, it won't render. And we're seeing huge performance improvements by doing this. And to give you an example of how that looks once we get down, first, we have global stuff. This is the stuff that you are including all across the site, all of your global templates and your global SAS, like your base, typography and stuff like that. But the real meat and potatoes is this partials directory. And if we drill into components, and then I believe we are in simple, and then page turn right here. So we're kind of organizing this in the same manner as that design system was organized. And then I've got my CSS here, and then I've got there's a little bit of wizardry going on with this template where it's including that template or including this THEMEKIT library, depending on the name of this component, only on that page. So this is a kind of a simple example. And like I said, the performance improvement of including the CSS from a super small CSS file only on one page might not be huge, but when you compound that across the entire site, and you're only loading those components as you need them, it's extremely powerful, and we're seeing tons of awesome results from that. The added benefit here is that example is only CSS, but we're also including templates with the component. So for instance, a good example would be like a node. I have a resource node. I'm putting all of my resource templates in here along with the styling that relate to those. So if somebody else comes into the project at a later date, they know exactly, like if they're looking at a resource, they can look at the theme and they know exactly what is controlling what, just by looking in this one directory, instead of having to look in templates where there's all your templates and look in your SAS where there's all your SAS. Instead of doing that, we're kind of following like that front end framework approach. I know Vue likes to do this a lot to kind of keep stuff kind of in the same directories, and we're kind of adapting that too. And it's making it a lot easier. Like there's a little bit of a learning curve getting Webpack rolling and getting all that stuff rolling. And that's the beauty of THEMEKIT, is it kind of gives you that base point to run with there. So I'm just checking on time here. Okay, yeah, we're looking pretty good. So yeah, so this is the main dev piece that I wanted to showcase, just because this relates to design systems in a great way, and it's just really cool to think, kind of bring that full circle all the way back, how that design system affects design, affects dev planning, and it affects dev implementation, and then that all filters out down to the client as well, and they end up benefiting immensely from this componentization as well. So we can bounce over to client training and content entry, and I'll let Jess jump in here.
Cool, yeah. So yeah, to wrap it up, we're going to talk a little bit about how all of this, like Eric mentioned, comes together to benefit the client, to help them sort of understand the value of a design system and how it helps them. Eric, can you make your window a little bit bigger?
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm sorry about that. There we go.
No, cool, thank you.
Good.
All right, so for unstructured content types where the components play a really large role, we urge our clients to spend the time making a plan for each page. And I would argue, like for content entry, that this is one of the most important steps of doing like that actual manual content entry process. Making a plan for a page ahead of time allows, we tell our clients, it allows them to move quickly once it's time to start migrating, and taking time to think through like the new content and the page goals, how they can use components will help them get the most out of the design system. So typically what we recommend, and we'll show you a couple quick examples of of ways that clients can do this, but that they have the current page of their old site up that they're going to be migrating, as well as the component guide or the design system, like the component portion of the design system. And then we tell them, you know, to think about the current content on the page and the goal of the page, and does anything need to change? From there, they can use the component guide to find components that will accommodate the content on that page or adapt content to fit into the new design system. And then sort of documenting that plan so that when it's time to enter that page into the site, they can reference that plan to just quickly build the page later on. So most of the time, the clients that we work with, they are starting off with what we lovingly refer to, like on the left-hand side, is wall of text marketing pages. So really what that means is it's just really text heavy. So our goal, one of our big goals with the design system and componentization, is to just make their or help their content be a little bit more engaging, and really just like making it more scannable for their users to understand the point of that page better. So, but for the clients, the idea, like sometimes they've been doing things a certain way for a long time, and the idea of figuring out how the content on those long copy marketing pages fits into the new componentized designs can be a little bit overwhelming at first. So teaching them how to use the design system to aid in that process is pretty important. And we just at this stage really emphasize to clients that the components are probably not going to be one-to-one with what they currently have on the site. So sometimes it's probably not going to be clear right away which component a client will have to use. And in those cases, we really advise adapting content to fit into one of the new components. And that whole process of going through the planning phase really, I think, helps clients critically think through and like just taking that step to plan it out will help them get the most out of their design system so that they don't just rebuild what they currently have. And then these are just some quick ideas for how a client can document their plan. Some of our clients have had success with a hands-on approach to planning their content, which literally, like, number one is just literally printing out the components, cutting them up, and like rearranging them on a table or something like that, and taking a photograph to document that plan. If you click on, Eric, the second example, this is a way that our clients can do that digitally. So this is another InVision tool that we like to use a lot called InVision Freehand. And what I've done on the left-hand side is put together, or I've taken screenshots and added in screenshots of every component within the design system. And then we tell our clients to copy or paste or like option drag those components out to put together plans for a page. Can you zoom in just really quickly on the example page plan?
Yeah.
Cool. So you'll see like they can just copy and paste those components, and even though the content itself is going to change, it helps them sort of go through that exercise of thinking about what components they're going to use. It can quickly just like document what they want to change, like maybe they want the image on the left, so I want to like swap those sections there, or documenting notes about like content, what type of content you want to use that component for, which testimonial you would want to feature, which sort of like tags you would want that dynamic content to be populated based on. So it's just a good way to help people start thinking about design systems in the way that we're used to doing every day. And then the third example is just, I'm going to show it super fast, but this is another way that we've had clients approach this in the past. So this particular client created a separate content doc for every single page, and then actually had some people from our team do content entry. But you can see, like, in the blue, they have the name of the component up there. They have maybe, like, if it's a variation, they've outlined what the H2 is, what all the copy is that I need to have in there. They'll even include links to, like, images and stuff. So they've gone through that planning process. This is sort of like the output of that, with taking it to the next level and having some real content in there. And then when you're going through and doing, like, the manual migration process, we like to use a spreadsheet to manage that process. So it's really easy for, like, every page to just throw in a link to that content doc, and it has the plan. I already know which components I'm using, what order they're going in. I have all the copy and everything that I need to build out that page without needing to bother anybody. Cool.
Cool. All right. Yeah. And one final note from myself in terms of a dev perspective on, like, client training and content entry is the utmost importance of help text. The main point being, just because it makes sense to you doesn't mean it makes sense to your content editors. And then additionally, just because it makes sense to you now doesn't mean it'll make sense to you in a year when you come back and haven't touched the site in necessarily a while. So I just find that it's extremely helpful to make sure you document each and every content type, component, field. Every content type should have a description. You know, as an admin's going in and adding content, they may not remember which content type is for which piece of content that they're adding. So if you have a quick description of what should go there, it's extremely helpful. You don't want to get into a situation where a client's all of a sudden doing a bunch of content entry and adding page upon page of content to the wrong content type, you know, and all of a sudden now if you have a view that's trying to sort resources or something and they added them all as landing pages, you know, that's kind of a bad situation. So being sure to document that. And then again, any non-standard field should just have some help text added. You know, if it's a heading, it's fairly obvious, you know, that it's what that's going to do. So you may not need it there, but, you know, if it's a field used for creating a custom sort or something like that, just to document that pretty thoroughly in help text, you know, and Drupal makes it super easy to add help text to every field. It's just, it'll save you time in the long run, and it'll make your content admins much more happy. Yeah, and again, this helps content admins as well as yourself and other devs in future phases. So we just got a quick example, again, from UBT, that bank website that I showed you before, for just help text. And this one's actually an interesting example because of headings. You know, you might think that a heading or what we're calling micro titles wouldn't need a description. However, this one had, like, SEO implications where the small title appearing above the big title, like it's kind of like a little eyebrow or whatever, that's actually the H1 in this instance, and content admins may not know that. And if they're trying to be SEO conscious, they would want to make sure they're loading that H1 with their keywords. And if this help text wasn't there, they may or may not know that that's the case. So that's a very good instance where you just want to really be explicit with that kind of stuff. And that filters through down to different other components, you know, just adding help text where necessary. It doesn't take much time as you're thinking through the build spec and stuff like that. It just helps to just do it then and there instead of going back through the site after everything's built and racking your brain for all the different details. It's just keep that stuff in mind as you're building stuff out, and you will thank yourself later. Cool, and that's pretty much all we had. I know there's kind of limited time. We've got about 3 minutes left. If there's any questions, we can try and squeeze it in. But again, Jess and I will be in the room Slack after this. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer those.
Yeah, I threw a quick note in the Zoom chat with the link to the MidCamp Slack if you're not in there. And then I let you guys know which channel you can find us in Slack as well if you have any follow-up questions. Cool.
Yeah, and then just 2 more final slides here. Feedback is definitely appreciated. So if you guys have any feedback, feel free to visit this link on this deck here. Positive, negative, we want it all. Let us know how we did. And then finally, Contrib Days happening. I believe it's still happening digitally, so don't forget about that on Saturday, and pop in there. It's great to give back to the community. You know, we all get a lot out of Drupal, and I think it's extremely beneficial to try and give back when possible. And again, you don't, just because you don't know how to code doesn't mean you can't give back. Documentation can be written. Even UI and UX can happen. You know, I know there's a ton of that happening with the new Claro admin theme. Like, you know, that just because you aren't a coder doesn't mean you can't help contribute to Drupal. So keep that in mind. And with that, thank you.